listening to Diasporic Music on Black Power 96 with Melinda Francis, the co-host, co-producer, and Lisa Watson is on buttons and joining us on the line. From somewhere in the third world, as Che Guevara used to say, is a Dr. Gerald Horne. And Dr. Horne has been a guest on this show for, I guess we can say, decades. And he is the holder of the John J. and Rebecca Moore's chair of African Studies, African American Studies at the University of Houston. And we are dying to hear how everything went yesterday in Lamert Park, Africa Town in Lamert Park.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Yes, yesterday was the event for radio station KPFK, Pacifica Radio Los Angeles. I am here now in the Southland, Southern California. The fundraiser went well. I think the gross thus far has been about $5,000 US, which is about half as much as we raised in Washington, D.C. in October 2023. However, having said that, the event was very, very good. It's always good to see old friends and comrades here in the Southland where I used to reside. And what more can I say?
You said it's going to be broadcast. It'll be visually as well, huh?
Well, sure. You know, Pacifica, they try to squeeze every cent out of these types of events, and so the tape, the audio, and the visual will be auctioned off as a part of a premium to become a member of the station.
Sounds good.
You can look for that on kpfk.org.
All right, Melinda, you can kick us off.
Yeah. Why don't we, the first thing is these new attacks on Syria and Jordan, I believe.
Yes, it happened in the last 48 hours or so. Recall that this past week, there were 3 U.S. soldiers, all of whom were Black, by the way. And if I'm not mistaken, all of whom were from the state of Georgia. 2 of the 3 being Black women. One of the points with regard to the U.S. military that emerged from this killing is that a disproportionate number of the women who are in the U.S. military are Black women, interestingly enough. Needless to say, it's not because they have a bent towards protecting U.S. imperialism. It's because that they perceive that there is an opportunity for advancement that's not available in civilian life, because after all, when you enter the military, there are certain kinds of educational benefits that you can garner. There's a whole medical complex, the Veterans Administration. Veterans have subsidized health care, not unlike the single payer system that encompasses most north of the border in Canada. And so what's interesting also in that regard, as a further footnote, is that when the U.S. Supreme Court overthrew affirmative action, that is to say, overthrew systematic attempts to uproot anti-Blackness and uproot other forms of discrimination against categories of people, including women of various ancestries, including the Latino population, Latinx population, etc. They made an exception with regard to uprooting they made an exception with regard to downgrading or degrading affirmative action in the military. That is to say, as of today, you're protected as a Black person against racism more in the U.S. military than you are in civilian life. Now, of course, that's a reflection of the fact that, as noted, that the U.S. military is heavily dependent upon Black people. That is what keeps the imperial engine humming. And as noted, given the fact that the options in civilian life are oftentimes limited, that means that more Black people in particular go into the military. And as I talk about in my book that'll be out in a few months on Southern California in the 60s and 70s, one of the things the Panthers tried to do was recruit within the military. And they did a fairly good job of it, in fact, because as you know, just south of here in San Diego is a military bastion. San Diego is a major port, major U.S. naval port. Many of the vessels sailed from this neighborhood to go bomb North Vietnam during the battle days of the wars in Indochina. During the war with Spain that led to the United States seizing the Philippine Islands at the end of the 19th century, many of the vessels sailed from Dandy San Diego, as they call it. And so that is a story with regard to the Panthers that needs to be uplifted, because we know that when fascism was overthrown in Portugal in 1974, which laid the foundation for the subsequent liberation of the former Portuguese colonies of Angola and Mozambique in 1975, part of the reason for that was that the left in Portugal, not least the Communist Party, had worked within the military. And in many ways, the left had seized control of the military by 1974. And so this is what the Panthers were attempting, but alas, it didn't work out. But in any case, so what happens after the killing of these 3 U.S. military personnel, somewhere in either Jordan, Syria, or Iraq, that's still contested, U.S. imperialism decided to retaliate in the last 48 hours by bombing that territory. Now, according to mainstream U.S. press reports, the Biden regime is not seeking to engage Iran militarily, although if you look at the overheated press coverage, there is an all-out assault on Iran. Iran is being blamed for the rise of Hamas in Gaza, for the attacks from Yemen on vessels headed to Israel and elsewhere. Iran is being blamed for Hezbollah, the militia in southern Lebanon that's giving Israel fits right now. And Iran is being blamed for the killing of these 3 U.S. military personnel. And yet, despite that overheated inflammatory reportage, supposedly the Biden regime does not want to broaden the conflict to where there would be an all-out war between the United States and Iran, although it's no secret that the Zionist lobby and Prime Minister Netanyahu in particular see a U.S. all-out war against Iran as helping to pull Israeli chestnuts out of the fire. That is to say that given the fact that Israel is not faring very well with regard to this conflict in Gaza, that they would like to see the United States enter the war on the side of Israel and then accomplish U.S. imperial goals by destroying the Islamic Revolution. And destroying the Islamic Revolution in Iran would also, according to Israel, be a boon for Israel's national security. So that's where things stand right now.
You're listening to Diasporic Music. We are in fundraising mode today, and I would like to ask Dr. Gerald Horne, why should people support Diasporic Music in particular and Black Power 96 in general?
Well, the reasons are obvious. First of all, it's the content which you cannot duplicate or replicate anywhere on any platform. YouTube, which has more content than you can shake a stick at, cannot compete with the uniqueness of diasporic music and Black Power 96. And then the second point with regard to the latter is that my understanding is that Black Power 96 has an organic connection with the African People's Socialist Party, if I'm not mistaken. And
Correct.
The African People's Socialist Party is now fighting meritless charges. That is to say, the Uhuru 3 is fighting meritless charges, including Chairman Yeshitela of the APSP. They're being accused of various federal crimes. If they come for the Uhuru 3 in the morning, they'll come for the rest of us in the evening. And so by contributing to diasporic music, you're wielding a mighty blow against US imperialism and their arrogant pretensions, where they dare to try to throw into a dungeon the Uhuru 3, that is to say, Chairman Yeshitela and his comrades. And we will not accept that. We will not stand for that. And I'm sure those within range of my voice would agree.
The last thing on that, not the last thing, but they're very, Omali, the Uhuru 3 have received more support than I think the state would really want to recognize. There's very, very few on the left, with a few exceptions. There are some people that claim to be Pan-Africanists who I won't name them publicly. I'm being very liberal. The support is quite remarkable in terms of Chairman O'Malley and the other, the Uhuru 2, are getting a lot of support from a lot of places where people didn't think they would get it. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh, sure, but I would like to hear more from you with regard to that point.
There's a show the other day. I can't remember the guy. Melinda, is it Greenwald show that he was on the other day?
Oh, Glen Greenwald.
Yeah, he was on that show, and apparently they had a congenial conversation. I mean, it didn't turn into a slugfest. You know what I mean? It was like he was sort of sympathetic to the cause, which was Chairman said that he was kind of shocked about that.
So am I.
I'm going to go back and look at it. I haven't seen it. Did you see it? Or I guess not.
No, I haven't seen it, but I'm quite familiar with Glen Greenwald, and since he's supporting the Uhuru 3, I'll just leave it at that.
I think we wanted to move to talk about the African continent of Blinken in Africa. Could you talk about that?
Abraham Lincoln?
Blinken, I'm sorry.
Oh, Blinken. Oh, Blinken. Sorry.
Sorry about that. My ebonics are getting in the way.
I see. So, yes, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who, by the way, is the stepson of the late fabulously wealthy attorney Samuel Pisar, who was a prime counsel for the Zionist lobby, not only in the United States, but in France. And of course, Secretary Blinken spent a good deal of his childhood and adolescence in France. Of course, as a result, speaks fluent French. Samuel Pisar also happened to be the attorney for Eldridge Cleaver. After Eldridge Cleaver, an early member of the Black Panther Party and the leader of the Black Panther Party, decided in the 1970s to turn tail and come back to the United States and cut a deal with his lawyer, Samuel Pisar, the stepfather of Anthony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, preparing the path for him. But in any case, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was in Africa in recent days. He traveled to Cabo Verde, Cape Verde, as we say. He traveled to Nigeria, and there hangs a tale because U.S. imperialism is quite unhappy about the case brought by South Africa against Israel in the International Court of Justice. And one does not have to be a soothsayer to figure out that U.S. imperialism now is trying to arrange on the continent an anti-South Africa bloc. And they see Nigeria as part of that bloc. And as a detail, you may, in that context, want to screen the South African film distributed through Hollywood called District 9, which portrayed Nigerians as monsters from outer space, believe it or not. In any case, Nigeria, along with India, has not necessarily been sympathetic to the Palestinians. Some of this has to do with the same reason why New Delhi has not been sympathetic. That's to say, a bent towards skepticism of Islam. Of course, Nigeria is facing the religious zealots of Boko Haram, which style themselves as Muslim, but actually are involved in all manner of misdeeds, including kidnapping teenage girls, for example. So Secretary Blinken was welcomed in Abuja. He then flew on to Angola. Recall that it was in the mid-1970s that U.S. imperialism tried to block the independence of Angola, and it took the dispatching of thousands of Cuban troops to vouchsafe the independence of Angola as they defeated the apartheid army on the battlefield. But now the worm has turned, and U.S. imperialism feels that it can woo Angola into this anti-South African bloc. I don't think it can, but certainly the Angolans are not reluctant to take aid from U.S. imperialism, up to and including U.S. imperialism helping to complete a railway, the Benguela Railway, which they sought to destroy through their proxies in the 1970s. And of course, this railway will help get the riches, not only of Angola, to ocean ports where they can be transported across the Atlantic to the United States, but also the copper of neighboring Zambia, with copper being essential to the emerging green economy. In that context, I have a sad announcement to make, which is that the president of Namibia, 82-year-old Hage Geingob, has passed away from cancer in a hospital in Windhoek, the capital. Just before he passed away, he had come as a last-ditch effort to be treated by U.S. cancer specialists. Obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously it didn't work out. Well, I'm not going to go down a conspiratorial road. Let's just say it didn't work out, and he passed away. And his lasting testament might be some of the latest published remarks by President Geingob, a leading member of SWAPO, the Southwest African People's Organization, the ruling party in Namibia, with President Geingob being educated in part in the United States of America at Fordham University in the Bronx in New York, recalled that just before he passed away, he upbraided and rebuked the former colonial master in that part of Africa, speaking of Germany, for not extending reparations to Namibia, although, of course, Berlin extended reparations to Israel, although Israel was not in existence at the time of Nazi depredations culminating in 1945 with the overthrow of the regime. President Geingob also supported his comrades in South Africa with regard to their case in the ICJ. And perhaps it's not coincidental that Secretary of State Blinken on this tour of Africa did not land in Windhoek, Namibia, because perhaps he sensed that he would receive a frosty reception, if any reception at all. But alas, this is part of the tale of U.S. imperialism. And one more point, hats off to the progressive forces of the United States of America, who now have a new protest. It's called Occupy Blinken. There is an encampment in front of his Virginia mansion on a 24/7 basis. Whenever he and his entourage try to leave home to go to the State Department in Washington, D.C., there are raucous shouts. There's been fake blood thrown upon his limousine, or actually the current fashion for dignitaries is not to have a Cadillac limousine, but to have a Chevy Suburban, this oversized monster that burns fuel like crazy. And so hats off to the protesters and Occupy Blinken. As the Christians like to say, they're doing the Lord's work.
Let me say, as you mentioned, Eldridge Cleaver, Papa Rage, and I remember Eldridge Cleaver. I never will forget. I think it was one of those Christian shows. He told a story about how he wanted to go back to America, and he had a vision, and I think he got on his knees and he said the Lord's Prayer, and then he saw Marx, and he saw Lenin, he saw Stalin, he saw Mao Zedong, he saw himself, he saw Jesus, and he got on his knees and told Kathleen Cleaver, "Honey, we're going home." But everybody thought that was Eldridge Cleaver was a great actor, and the real reason he wanted to come home was because he had millions of dollars in royalties on the book from the book Soul on Ice, which was a bestseller. Not only sold in English, they printed it in Farsi, French, Spanish. So he had millions of dollars. So everybody says he cooked that scheme up so he could come back, collect his money, and not go to prison.
Well, it's interesting. I talk about that in my book, which should be out, as I said, by the summer. And the royalties from Soul on Ice led to extensive litigation. What I mean by that is that the way Eldridge got sprung from prison in December 1966 was that he was able to woo a Jewish American lawyer by the name of Beverly Axelrod.
Yes.
Who he wooed. Their letters are quite intriguing. I use those letters to paint a psychological portrait of Eldridge as a sociopath and a psychopath. And a line that I've written, I regret having to quote myself, but it's appropriate in this context. A line that I use with regard to Eldridge Cleaver is that if you're able to fake sincerity and fake authenticity, your path can be smoothed. And Mr. Cleaver was able to fake sincerity and authenticity, which was one of the reasons he was able to traduce the otherwise wily Beverly Axelrod, who, by the way, even after they broke up, she remained close to to Huey Newton. The picture, the iconic picture of Huey Newton in the rattan chair with the spear, recall, and his beret and black leather jacket, that picture was taken at Beverly Axelrod's San Francisco flat, for example. And when Huey was on trial for the shooting, if not the killing, if I'm not mistaken, of an Oakland police officer, Beverly Axelrod was in conversations to, shall we say, free him through extra legal means, for example. So she was a real comrade. And then, as I talk about in the book, after she and Eldridge have a parting of the ways, she goes in exile in Grenada in the Caribbean. This is before 1983 and the triumph of New Jewel.
Before the revolution. That was during Gary's time, huh?
And she had to beat off, shall we say, the aggressive entreaties of Prime Minister Eric Gary.
Sir Eric Gary. Okay.
It's all in the book. Look for it. It'll be out this summer.
Let me say one last thing. Eldridge Cleaver was Al Prentice Bunchy Carter. You probably put this in the book. Was sent to make a move on Eldridge Cleaver because Eldridge had left the Nation of Islam and was going with Malcolm's organization. And Al Prentice Bunchy Carter was his assignment was to basically to put a hurt on Eldridge Cleaver. And before he could do that, Eldridge had converted Bunchy, and Bunchy became ended up leaving the Nation of Islam and going with Eldridge and supporting Malcolm X.
Well, Eldridge Cleaver is an interesting psychological story. It'd make an interesting movie, in fact, because as I paint him, one metaphor I use is that he had Marx on one shoulder and Machiavelli on the other shoulder.
Right.
Another metaphor that I use is that he has Malcolm X on one shoulder and Frantz Fanon on the other shoulder. Right. So he was obviously a wordsmith, obviously, as we used to say, has the gift of gab. Unlike Huey Newton, who shied away from public speaking, I think because of Huey's voice, which did not necessarily comport with his muscled torso, shall we say. Cleaver, of course, was an impassioned public speaker, although I must say I was not a fan of his overuse of what's called profanity. And obviously he was a very good writer. And obviously he was a kind of hypnotist when it comes to convincing folk to follow him. Indeed, even after he turned tail and became a conservative Christian, by some estimates, he joined the Church of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons. But you still have militants to this very day who swear by Eldridge Cleaver. After all of the changes he went through and after all the changes he sent people through.
Well, let me say that, and we'll close by the Eldridge. Yeah, one of Eldridge's friends he was very close to Ritchie Valens, the singer, who was one of the February 3rd was the day the music died, and that was the Big Bopper, Buddy Holly, and Ritchie Valens. They were killed in a plane crash, and Ritchie Valens and Eldridge Cleaver knew one another. They grew up in East Los Angeles together.
Well, that's not represented in the Lou Diamond Phillips movie about Ritchie Valens, which I think is called La Bamba.
I saw it. Good. I enjoyed the movie, but no, that's not in there. But Eldridge was definitely he and Ritchie Valens were pretty close, and also Gil Scott-Heron. I think one of the first songs that Gil Scott-Heron sang publicly was "Ooh Donna." I think he was trying to go with a girl named Donna. Gil talks about that in his autobiography.
Mm-hmm.
That's neither here nor there. I guess, Melinda, you have any more questions?
Well, I don't know what we have time for. We have stuff on the deck. What did you mean by BYD passive?
Oh, yes. So BYD is this Chinese auto manufacturer, electric vehicles. It's challenging Tesla, the firm founded by the man from apartheid South Africa, now in the United States, Elon Musk, reputed billionaire. BYD is really challenging Tesla, even though Tesla, of course, has some of its major manufacturing facilities in China, just like BYD does as well. And BYD's sales in 2023 surpassed that of Tesla, even though there's stiff tariffs or taxes against BYD that limits their penetration of the US market. But other than the US market, BYD is cleaning up. And this is part of the larger story of China in the passing lane, which you have to understand if you're trying to understand global politics. I was listening to an analyst of Palestinian affairs, whose name I will not mention, who was giving an analysis of what had befallen Palestinians in recent decades. But what was missing was a failure to put it in a global context. And so you get the idea that the problem that the Palestinians have, it really comes down to the shortcomings of the leadership. Now, I mean, you can make an argument about the shortcomings of the PLO and the shortcomings of al-Fatah and the shortcomings of Yasser Arafat, et cetera. But to try to make that analysis without making reference to the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of the socialists, yeah, I mean, it was really rather short-sighted. And so I guess a concluding point is that as we go forward and we try to plot a way forward with regard to, say, the Black Liberation Movement in the United States, with regard to the progressive movement in North America writ large, you have to plot a way forward in the context of these gigantic, colossal global changes, not least being the rise of China, the rise of the BRICS. And by the way, in terms of BRICS, we now know that Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Ethiopia have accepted membership in the BRICS formally. This is now a formidable bloc that's going to provide a stiff challenge to U.S. imperialism and the group of 7, the Western European countries plus Japan. So I guess that's an appropriate point on which to conclude.
Dr. Horne, let me say this before you go. I did this copy of Blows Against the Empire, U.S. Imperialism in Crisis. I think that was a 2008 volume that you did. You were basically talking about the rise of China. You predicted the rise of China in that particular volume. Is that book like readily available? Do people have to go to Amazon, or is that in can you just order that from get bookstores to order it?
All of the above, or you can go to the publisher. It's still in print, International Publishers in New York. And by the way, let me announce here something that I may not have announced previously, which is that I've funded a fellowship for a book to be published that deals with the connection between Black people and the indigenous groupings of North America. This is based in part upon the stories I grew up with by my parents from Jim Crow, Mississippi, and Mississippi being the heart of darkness when it comes to depredations inflicted upon Black people. And I have made the supposition that it has a lot to do with the violence inflicted upon the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Natchez, and the indigenous people, and that prepares the way for violence against Black people. So if you go to the International Publishers website, you'll see this endowment that I've established. So for budding writers, check it out.
All right, the Choctaw. I got the Choctaw in me through my my Mississippi-born grandmother. But last thing is we're going to be trying to raise. I'm going to get Melinda to talk about how they can support diasporic music. And Dr. Horne, thank you very much for all your support. And we will be speaking to you next week, sir.
Yes, I'm signing off. Goodbye.
And Melinda, how can people support diasporic music on Black Power 96?
Yes. So as we've been saying all show, this is our fund drive. We are fundraising for the station and for the show. You support the station, you support the show. Our goal at the station is 10,000. But as Gerald said, the station's in constant attack, so we need ongoing support. So go to www.blackpower96.org/donate and donate now.
And I would like to thank Melinda. I would like to thank Lisa Watson for keeping us on track. And like we say every week, we will see everyone in the whirlwind.